Hey, everybody, and welcome to another midweek Bible study with me. So glad that you're here today. We're taking a look today at the shortest book in the Old Testament. Any guesses as to what that is? Kind of thinking through, I don't know, Amos was pretty short, Hosea last week, a couple weeks ago. Today, we are taking a look at the book of Obadiah. That's right. And it's super short, the shortest one in the Old Testament, like I said. I like these little books of the Old Testament because sometimes we think that we can kind of gloss right over them and forget about them because they're not that significant. But in these few verses, they're written beautifully, intentional, intentional words to drive home a point for our lives today, and also using these Old Testament books as this field guide for spotting Jesus in them. So let's just jump right in where we see Obadiah. If you're in a group setting, this is a great time to go through these questions. What do you know about Obadiah? What happened? And maybe you don't know much at all, and that's okay. But list as many facts as you can, and you can hit pause now. And welcome back. If you're watching online too, we're just going to keep on moving ahead. The theme of Obadiah, I don't want you to miss it, is God's vengeance against pride. That sounds pretty nasty because all of us at some point or another are probably kind of a prideful people. But the book of Obadiah does not shy away from that. And it's straight up a book about God's vengeance. And so it sounds harsh and it sounds it sounds like it's a book without grace, but we're going to see that that's actually not true. There is grace in the book of Obadiah, maybe not where you think it is, and not the type of grace that you might come to expect. It's certainly, though, a book that highlights the cost of grace, and it's kind of an antithesis to cheap grace. Let's take a look at what's in it a little bit more pointedly. So as a summary, the book of Obadiah is the shortest book in the whole Old Testament. Like I said, it's only 21 verses long. That's it. It's a divine judgment poems against the nation of Edom. I want to show you a little bit where Edom is. I brought a map with here. Israel is loosely around that red oval that you got there. On the southeast of Israel is the ancient site of Edom, and it's important to recognize it's not just any other nation. Sometimes it's true that the people that we argue with most, or the people that we have most tension with, is our own family, and that's exactly the case with Edom. It goes way, way back to the book of Genesis. Remember, Abraham had a son Isaac, who had a son Jacob, and also Esau. Jacob and Esau, those two twins that could not be any more dissimilar, it seems like. Remember, Esau was the hairy older one by like minutes. He was the hunter-gatherer type. Jacob was the homemaker. He hung out with his mom a lot in the kitchen. He cooked, he baked. That was Jacob. They, again, could not be more different. And remember, Jacob was kind of a swindler. Jacob was a trickster, his name literally means. Jacob ripped his brother Esau off kind of a lot. He was not a good guy. Let's not shy away from that. But he was God's guy. He was God's guy that God picked in order to make a nation great, which wasn't his own moral aptitude by any means. It was, again, demonstrated God's grace. But those two people, those two sons, Jacob was renamed into Israel and grew into this great nation of Israel. Esau was renamed into Edom and became this great nation of Edom. And even the two nations didn't get along any better than the two brothers did, except for that it played out on a national scale. And so they replayed that tension with skirmishes and wars and battles going back and forth. Remember, it's probably true that we fight with the people that are most close to us, including our own family members. One of these times it kind of came to a head when Israel was taken over by Babylon. Babylon came in and laid siege to Jerusalem, 586 BC, and just destroyed really everything, took a whole bunch of people off into exile. Well, that was Jerusalem, the capital city, and so obviously the nation is in ruins, is in wreck. Edom seized the opportunity to go in and to get some of their own, revenge against Israel, against Jacob, as a way of just kind of capitalizing on the bad place. So Edom goes and kicks Israel while it's down and invades some of the other smaller towns and plunders and really takes whatever they want from those other areas. And this just, it left a bad taste in the mouths of everybody in Israel, obviously. But the book of Obadiah is a prophet speaking to Edom and a few others included and saying, hey, God saw what happened and he's not okay with it. He's going to address it. And so what we see in the book of Obadiah is 2 acts with an intermission split in between. That's going to be really important. Remember, it's just a couple of dozen verses long, so stay tuned. Act 1 is the first 14 verses, and these are just the accusations where Obadiah, speaking on behalf of God, is saying, hey, God is going to bring you down from your high places. Now, that's a euphemism because the people of Edom lived in rocks and clefts, and so they kind of lived literally up high, but also with their pride and their self-exaltation, they felt all puffed up. And so Obadiah says on behalf of God that Edom will be brought low from their height and will be destroyed. And then there's this interesting intermission in Obadiah verse 15, where there's a switch from just talking about Edom to talking about all nations. Check this out. I just want to read the verse for you. It says that the day of the Lord is near. We've heard that phrase last week and the weeks past. The day of the Lord is near. Judgment is coming for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Significant shift midway through the verse or through the book. Obadiah 15, where you go from talking about these judgments on Edom now to all nations. That's a big deal, and it's an intentional deal as well. So we start Act 2 in Obadiah 16, where we see more about the day of the Lord. Remember, there's a shift from Edom to all nations, like Edom, will fall from their places. So check this out. What Obadiah is doing, really what God is doing through Obadiah, is using Edom as a stand-in. For what? Well, for all nations, but even more than that. Check this out. In the Hebrew language that this was written in, just look at the 3 words. They're called, the 3 letters that make up the words Edom. This is in the 3 letters that make up the word Adam. Hebrew is an extraordinary poetic language. And this is, it's not a coincidence that the 3 radicals, the little dots, those are the letters, the little dots that you see around some of these letters up here and these little symbols below the letters, those are the vowels. Those are put in a long time later. In their own text, they would have just had the what's called the radicals. They would have had those big letters here that are the exact same. In the context around there, you would be able to tell what the difference was. And so it's pretty clear that what Obadiah is saying, hey, there's this judgment against the pride of Edom, but really what we're talking about is this judgment against the pride of Adam from Genesis. Adam, all people, all of us, everyone. God is not going to overlook the pride and self-exaltation that we all have. And so he's offering this day of the Lord, this warning saying judgment is coming down. Now, however, don't ever forget that as in all prophecies, and judgment is never the last word. So we saw that in Joel, where God says that he'll save all who call on his name. In Amos, we saw that God will restore David's line, including Edom. That's even named out. Obadiah is no different. God of hope, the hope of God will be for all nations. And Obadiah ends in the last few verses with God's restoration of his own kingdom in the expansion of all territory. And there's this peace and justice that rules and reigns by the end of Obadiah. So kind of in conclusion, the ancient pride and betrayal became an example of the human condition and the ways we betray and hurt each other. God will deal with it, but also bring his healing and peace on it. So this is kind of Obadiah in a nutshell. Pride, self-exaltation. God hates these things in Edom. Edom is a stand-in for all of us. God's judgment is coming. Again, it sounds like a book absolutely without grace. So where in the world would we see Jesus. This is so great. The promise of Obadiah is that God will not ignore justice. He will take vengeance on the prideful and everybody who mistreats other people. Edom, again, is a stand-in for Adam, all of us, which means God will have his justice on against all of us. In fact, God did exact his judgment in one huge monumental act full of judgment on anyone who would ever set themselves against God or God's purposes with pride, with self-exaltation. But the one who stood in and received that great amount of judgment was God himself. It was Jesus. God paid for it. This is a beautiful picture of God saying, I'm not going to overlook it. My justice will be satisfied. But it won't fall on Edom. It won't fall on Israel. It will fall on myself. It'll fall on Christ himself. So Jesus provides the satisfaction for God's vengeance and delivers us from pride and arrogance. In Jesus, we died as enemies of God. Remember, Edom and Israel, and then we raised up as his adopted heirs, his adopted sons and daughters. It's a cool picture of not just what happened historically, but also in the grand narrative of the story that God was telling throughout all times and places, from the beginning of time to the end of time. You can see how it all just fits in there. Just so cool. But it's a poignant book that really demands some action to be taken as a result of it. That vengeance, remember, belongs to God and God alone. That it was not up to Israel to exact that vengeance against Edom. The book's warning was saying, hey, God will take care of this. God will resolve this. Vengeance belongs to God. Romans 12. Don't repay anyone for evil. Be careful to do as is right in the eyes of everyone. Do not take revenge, dear friends. Leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. This is such a call to action, because what this means is that if you surrender yourself to God, it also means surrendering your right to get even. And that hits me pretty hard. I think about where, maybe with whom, do I need to surrender my right to get even? And again, it's a right. Somebody acted unjustly to you. Legally, you have the right to get even with them. But the call of Christianity and the call of God in our lives is to say, listen, are we going to trust God to say, to have his right be done, to surrender our right and have God's moral right to be done, knowing that God will address it however he decides to address it. And he is an extraordinary, compassionate God. All right, so we got some group questions down here below, and I'm going to leave these on the screen for a little while, and you can check those out. Hit pause and check those out anytime now. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week at noon.